introduce yourself?
Yes, I will. I'm actually not with the Department of Insurance, but I'll fill in for my buddy, my Uncle Ron. I'm Danielle with Chendusa Insurance Agency. I am here representing the professional insurance agents of Louisiana. And in his absence, I was on the same video with Ron last week, so I kind of remember a little bit of what he had talked about. There are some things that he went into that I'll leave for the Department of Insurance professional, but one pretty important factor is he wanted everyone to read and understand his policies, your policies. So that's going to be the next slide. It's important during this hurricane season, before the hurricanes come, to understand where your coverage is, where your policy is, who your policy is written with, what that document looks like. Understand that there's a section for property and there's a section for liability coverage. Typically the first 4 steps of your policy, A, B, C, and D, are going to pertain directly to your property coverage, and then liability and medical are E and F, if you will. Look, when you find your policy, look for the exclusions and the endorsements. There's a lot of information in that section, and usually it's about page 2 or 3 of your declarations page or of your policy, depending on how many pages it actually is. But that will give you a little insight into what is and is not covered, what's been added and what hasn't been added, what will your policy specifically exclude. While we're talking about exclusions, you want to be sure you're very familiar with the wind hail exclusion. And if you have one of those, you need to call an agent and get that removed, or see what other coverage that could possibly be added to your policy. So that moves me right into what types of deductibles there are. So there's several different kinds of homeowners policies. You've got a personal homeowners, which is owner occupied. You have renters policies. You have a dwelling fire, which might be owner occupied, but it might also be built for tenant occupancy. You have a contents policy and condo policies. All of those things should have 2 different sections for deductibles. One is your all other peril deductible, which is usually a flat number, 1,000, maybe 2,500. Sometimes it can be a percentage. And then you will see something that's called a hurricane or a named storm deductible. And also you might see the wind hail deductible. If you don't see where it says wind hail and there is not a wind hail exclusion, then that would mean your wind hail coverage, anything that's not a named storm or a hurricane, would be included in your all other peril deductible. That's something to be really aware of, that there's different types. And then there are also different types of policies will allow for a calendar year named storm or calendar year hurricane deductible, which means you have one deductible for the hurricane season, June 1st to July 1st. Wouldn't that be fancy? I'm sorry. November 30th. And that's one deductible. So you might have some opportunity there to not have to come up with that deductible more than once. Understanding actual cash value versus replacement cost is always a lot of fun to explain to someone who, let's say they've already paid off their home, or they're going into a mortgage on a new purchase that they've put down a substantial amount. We want to always cover for replacement costs. And of course, right now, it's a bit of a struggle because the cost of everything is up so much. So explaining that we need to make sure we're covering the highest amount of replacement costs for right now until either that inflation levels off or doesn't. If you go within an 80%, and I like to stay within 81%, that makes me feel a little bit better. Most companies will accept that as your replacement cost coverage. And anything below that, you'll be penalized in a claim for carrying less than replacement cost if your policy requires that. So, and that would be considered the actual cash value. Some people are perfectly comfortable with actual cash value depending on the investment that they've made into their property. All of this information should be able to be found on the declaration page of your homeowners or property insurance policy. And if you have trouble locating that, call your agent. Be sure to get in touch with your agent or your client's agent and figure out how you can help them locate that. And then, of course, on your declaration page, we can go to the next slide, if you will. If once we have a storm, if there is a horrible incident, you want to encourage your client or your property investors to know where the insurance company name is, file the claim, and be sure to mitigate, which means protecting your property from any additional damage that may have happened. Adjusters and insurance companies do have timelines. we've seen some excessiveness this past year because, of course, we had a very excessive hurricane active season. And so some of the companies have been granted state of emergency extensions. I wish Ron was here because he could talk more about the logistics of all of that. But it was really tough for some of our companies because there just weren't enough adjusters this year to go around. So we had to kind of give them a little extra time to get to everyone who needed our help. How long will it take for my insurance claim to be settled? It really kind of depends on you, yourself, your client, whomever is filing the claim, and how on top of it that they will be and how on top of it their adjuster will be. If you're answering the phone, that's a big part of it. Making sure, I don't always answer my phone when I see a crazy number calling, but in that time of need, you want to make sure you're telling your clients, be sure to answer any phone calls that come through, whether you're winning the lottery or, you need to extend the warranty on your vehicle again. Just keep answering the phone and you will get in touch with your adjuster. They will reach out to you. And if it goes too long, there's no reason why you shouldn't reach out to the Department of Insurance. I don't know what the extension timeline is, but certainly 30 days of contact with all of the documentation that they've requested turned in. If you've not heard anything, I would say reach out to your agent. And if that is not working out, then you should definitely reach out to the Department of Insurance. And of course, there are claim denials. And I've seen claim denials in specific situations where your deductible is higher than the amount of damage that has happened. And so when that does happen, you still want to get everything repaired. You want to make sure you save all of your receipts, because in that situation, if we have another storm and you have additional damage, that could count towards your deductible for any additional damage that's done from hurricane season or hurricane specifics. And this is the part where I don't really think I can talk too much about the NAIC, except to say that this app that they've come out with, I actually downloaded it and it's really great. A lot of times my clients will ask me, how do I know how much contents coverage do I need? And do I even have to have replacement cost? And taking this app and running through your house room by room, it's very time effective for if something were to happen, like a horrible flood or a horrible storm. And you lose things, you don't remember what you had or what it was worth. Or in this app, it will actually let you scan barcodes and save them room by room in your home. And it's just a great resource. I would say, I tell my clients every Christmas, say the first week after New Year's, what was purchased new, especially if you have a house full of kids like I do. We've got all kinds of new stuff that has value, and I want to make sure that we're covered appropriately. You want to do the same thing, and the same thing for rental properties and businesses as well. When you're making purchases, buying office equipment and things like that, it's easy to kind of get lost in the shuffle. And this app would actually allow you to keep track of those things without having to keep, say, a running list on your computer that might get lost, might shut down. You'd have it on your phone all the time. You can log into the app. And does anybody else want to chime in on the NAIC?
I've been told that Warren Bird has joined us to help cover for Ron. Do you have anything that you would like to add? I think you'll have to unmute yourself if you're talking.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, feel like an AT&T commercial. Okay. Yes, thank you. And Ron is out, unfortunately, with a family issue. So, but yes, and Danielle hit it correctly. The NAIC is big into trying to tell people how much value it is to you to, in advance, get an inventory of your home. It can be pictures, it can be a video, and if just since you scan barcodes, that's great. But I will say, having gone through a fire of my house in 2012, and I did not do this, by the way, it's become big the last 5 to 10 years here, whatever. It is an excellent way to document what you have in your house. Typically, by the way, your contents carriers will usually make it be approximately 75% of what your structure value is. So if you've got a $200,000 home, they'll typically assume $150,000 in contents. That's just a normal. You can ask for more, and you can probably ask for less if you need to through your carrier. But documenting what you have for an inventory is miles down the road when it comes time to submit your proof of loss for your claim. So yes. Danielle hit it on the head.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bird. We appreciate you joining us on short of notice. It's always a pleasure to see you again. And Mr. Bird and I have a very strong working relationship between FEMA and Louisiana Department of Insurance. So the next slide, I'm going to go ahead and take over. I'm the Regional Flood Insurance Liaison for FEMA out of Region 6. My primary responsibility is to help ensure that any of our insured customers, or survivors, or stakeholders, if they have any issues with flood insurance, the National Flood Insurance Program, that I facilitate a resolution to that issue. It doesn't matter if it could be improperly rated premiums, it could be partially denied claims, it could be time in the frame involved is exceeding acceptable limits in which claims can be paid. I'm the one who handles all that. And if I can't handle it at the regional level, then I send it up to the headquarters level to be handled in Washington, D.C. But what I wanted to talk to you about today is a lot of good information about standard homeowners insurance. But what I want to talk to you about is flood insurance. It's important that we understand there is a stark difference between standard homeowners insurance and a flood insurance policy. Flood insurance policy is single peril policy, so it covers damages only associated with flooding. But a couple of things I really want to get across here today is that there's a big difference between what is called disaster assistance and flood insurance. A disaster assistance is available if a disaster or an event is large enough to be declared a presidentially declared disaster. If that is involved, then FEMA opens up its warehouses and the mechanism that is the federal government pushes out to the areas. And we can, not all the time, but we can sometimes offer what's called disaster assistance. Now, the reasons why it's important to understand the difference is because they are stark difference in the amount of payouts. A flood insurance policy is a single peril policy that can be paid out for any time of definition of flooding occurs in FEMA eyes, which is very easy. But disaster assistance is only available for the once it's declared disaster. And the amounts, let me give you some examples for Louisiana. In 2020, we had Hurricanes Laura and Delta. The average disaster assistance grant or payout for Laura was just about $3,000. At the same time frame, the average flood insurance payout was $61,746. Huge difference in numbers. Let's move over to Delta, also in 2020. The average disaster assistance amount was $3,779, while the average flood insurance payout was $42,170. Now let's go back to 2016 timeframe. There was a lot of widespread flooding in Louisiana and Texas, but in Louisiana, the average disaster assistance payout was $9,350, so a little bit higher, right? But the average flood insurance payout was almost $100,000, $91,500. Now, the difference in the amount is really important because 1 inch of water can cost up to $25,000 to $26,000 of damage to modern construction homes. So it's really important that you're properly covered to help you rebuild after a flooding event. And that leads to my next topic. Get the amount of flood coverage you can afford. We have situations where I get calls all the time where people are calling me up saying that they can't afford their flood insurance anymore. Well, I'm happy to do a review of their policy with them. Come to find out, a lot of them have full statutory coverage, which is $250,000 building and $100,000 content. But when you look at their replacement cost value or the actual cost value of the homes, the communities are estimating that these houses are only valued at $150,000. So they're overinsured. They're paying higher than what they need. Because I guarantee you, even your house may be valued at $150,000. And if you have $250,000 coverage, you're not going to get $250,000 in claim payout. It's going to be the valuation of the home. So you can contact your local flood or your local insurance agents and tell them, hey, look, I appreciate you telling me what the statutory limits are, but I can't afford that. Let's talk about what I can afford. Because as you saw by the disaster assistance numbers, even $40,000 or $50,000 in flood insurance coverage is going to help you rebuild faster than reliant solely on a disaster assistance payout if they're available. And also, one of the things we really want to push, especially as we're fast approaching hurricane season, we talked about content a little bit ago in the last presentation, but renters can get content only flood insurance. Now, think of it like this. You put your house, your apartment in the palm of your hand, you turn it upside down and you shake it. whatever comes out is your content. And most of us have piecemealed our content together slowly over the years. You know, you buy your bedroom set one time, then, you know, a couple months later, you buy your living room couch, or a couple months later, you buy your TV. But have you ever thought about replacing all of these items at one time? The cost is going to be exorbitant. It's going to be really high. But renters can get content-only insurance through the NFIP for the peril of flooding. We guarantee you that the owners of the complex or the owners of the house have some type of disaster coverage, especially flooding if they are in a special flood hazard area. A lot of people don't understand that if you do live in a special flood hazard area and federal dollars touch your mortgage, such as Fannie Mae, Fannie Mac, VA, HUD, mandatory purchase of flood insurance is required. So that building is going to be covered. So if the renters don't have the coverage they need to help them rebuild, they are, you know, they're going to be footing the bill to replace all their content at one time. So let's also talk a little bit more about the NFIP insurance program. Make sure that you have the coverage you need. Make sure that you understand the differences in it. If you live in the coastal area, understand that if you do have an elevated structure, not only you have to worry about the peril of flooding, you have to take in considerations of wind. And understand that, as I mentioned, flood insurance is single peril. So if you have damage that is associated or from wind, the NFIP will not pay out. So you have to make sure you have the right type of coverage for your house. Now, one of the things we have in the NFIP is we really want houses to be mitigated. We want to break the cycle of flood, rinse, repeat. We don't want houses to have multiple claims, repetitive losses, right? So in some circumstances, if they are a pre-firm house, they're non-compliant, right? But it's not their fault they're non-compliant. They built before the firm was effective in that certain area. And if they are damaged to equal 50% of their market value, they could be eligible for what we call increased cost of compliance. Now, the increased cost of compliance is to be used for mitigation measures, what we call FRED, right? It's going to be flood proofing of non-residential structures. It's going to be relocation if someone has a higher point on their parcel. It can be elevation. That's what we see most often. And it also can be for demolishing. You know, people, flooding is a very traumatic experience. And once you've been through a couple of times, some people just want nothing to do with it. They'll sell out. We can demolish that house, turn it into green space. And that way we remove that flood, rinse, repeat cycle there. But it's not a guarantee. It's up to $30,000 for mitigation measures to bring your house in full compliance. So that's something to remember. If your house is below what we call the base flood elevation now, we want you to be mitigated. We want you to be elevated. But one of the things, the benefits about the increased cost of compliance is if a homeowner is non-compliant and they have repetitive losses, they could be eligible for certain grants. Now, these grants are overseen by FEMA, but administered by the state. But one thing they have in common is they have a cost mass associated with it. And a lot of time the homeowners have a 25% bill. Now, guess what that increased cost of compliance can be used for? You are absolutely right. It can be used to cover their cost match and help them fully elevate their structure. So that's really nice. Now, one of the things that we have to keep in mind too is the National Flood Insurance Program is using current rating methodologies based on 70s criteria. Financially sound, but it's not sustainable. We have revamped our entire system, and it's going to be called Risk Rating 2.0. It's not effective yet, but it is going to be launched in October of this year for new business only. Now, the differences is right now, our variables for rating on flood insurance are very simple. Either you're in the special flood hazard area or you're out. It's going to be based on riverine type flooding or coastal type flooding. And that's really it. There's going to be some characteristics on the individual structure, but it's very simple. But one of the things we are fixing is that we often see lower valuation homes subsidizing higher valuation homes. So what I mean by that is you may have a house that's valued at $150,000. Well, guess what? Their flood insurance premium is being rated on their neighbor if they have a house of $250,000. So the $250,000 house in a flooding event is going to sustain more damage. So the lower valuation home is in essence subsidizing that continued valuation of that home. So we are making that more fair. If you have a less valuation home, your flood insurance is going to be less. If you have a higher valuation home, your insurance is going to increase. But we're happy to say that we're actually making these more fair across the country. So one of the things that we have available through the NFIP to help people prepare for storm season coming up is we do have what's called loss avoidance. Now, loss avoidance is we reimburse certain costs if you spend this money to help you avoid damage to your structure. Now, the presentation, you see sandbags, water pumps. You can have generators, moving of equipment or your content to a storage area that's safe. We can reimburse you up to $1,000. Now, one of the best things about this benefit is that you do not have to meet your deductibles in order to apply for this. So I know some people in the NFIP world, our deductibles max out at $10,000. So if you have a high deductible and you're hesitant of using this, well, it's a good thing that you know that the deductibles do not have to be met in order to apply for the loss avoidance money. You just have to contact your insurance provider and tell them what you want to do, and they will initiate the process. One of the things that's important, though, is you have to make sure it is a eligible criteria, and you have to save all your receipts. So if you go and buy generators and you don't save your receipts, it's going to be hard for us to approve this. So make sure they're saved, they're clear, they're readable, don't get them wet. We know things are chaotic at that time, but just keep in mind, it's going to be worth it if you buy some of these measures and you'll be reimbursed up to $1,000. So here is some really good information, but what I'd like for you to focus on is the NFIP on LinkedIn. There's I belong to this. We post good information. A lot of messages are sent out. You can copy these. You can send these out to other people in your groups. It's a great aspect for social media, but take your time and look at this presentation. There's all kinds of good stuff. The door hangers, the real estate agent's guide to discussing flood insurance. It's great information and it's readily available, easy to understand, and very intuitive to use. With that, thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over.
Hello. Thanks, everybody. I'm Ed Sutherland. I'm the compliance manager for the Louisiana Office of Community Development. There's going to be a little bit of overlap with Gil and Danielle's information, which is really good information, by the way. But that being said, I'm going to basically go through some insurance documentation, eligibility issues that we sometimes see, as well as ownership and occupancy and how we use that to establish eligibility for our programs. And then I'll probably close with some duplication of benefits issues that we typically find for our applicants in our different programs. So next slide, please. Great. Typically we find that since it's a relatively short document and it's more easily accessible for potential occupants, we look at the deck page. It's kind of where we start with. It provides a high-level synopsis or snapshot of all the insurance coverage that's applicable. You should have your policy number in there, any coverage amounts or established policy limits. It'll include the name insured, the agent or the broker if one was involved, any premiums or deductibles. Basically, like I said, it's usually a 1 or 2 pager depending on all the information that it includes, but it provides a great snapshot to start off the process for eligibility determination for insurance, as far as insurance goes. It should include all pertinent insurance decks that are in there for all of your different policies. That being said, if you do have copies of your policies, those are very much helpful as well. Homeowners, renters, hazard, flood, please have all those, at least in PDF format, readily accessible. It's very helpful when going through the process. They should establish a chronology of coverage, including the effective date and the policy term dates. Those dates are important in order to establish coverage at the time of the event, which basically drives your overall eligibility determination. And it can have an impact on the level of benefits and eligibility for those benefits. And it's already been covered, but it should show coverage for contents. Most situations will have contents included for any homeowner that's considered a owner-occupant. And then thirdly, the statement of loss from your insurance carrier is very helpful. It should have a clearly stated settlement amount minus any applicable deductibles or applicable depreciation for your policy. And a check stub from the insurance payout showing payment is also really helpful for the people in our call centers when they're setting up the HAP program. Next slide, please. So The first place that our program staffers will go to usually is the tax roll when we're talking about ownership and occupancy. The annual statement from the tax assessor may be able to establish OO. A lot of these parishes now have this websites online. When I first started with the Road Home program, a lot weren't that way. We used to have to call them directly on the phone and get that documentation through fax or some other kind of means. But a lot of the, especially the larger parishes, have set up the TA information online. I know Orleans Parish does, Terrebonne Parish does. A lot of the other larger parishes have that very easily available now. So you can get that information, who the current owner of record is, and that's important to establish eligibility at the time of the event. Homestead exemption is typically what the program staffer is going to look for, because if they were granted a homestead exemption, then we can usually have comfort that it is that person's primary residence at the time of the event. Some ownership considerations, title search. A title search will usually be run for most programs before being funded, so please ensure that you're going to have a clear title when that search gets done. What does that mean? Well, please complete any successions, meaning, we find that in Louisiana, it's not atypical for, homes either in a double or even with tax parcels with multiple buildings on each parcel, that mother and father will live there, and when they pass on, one of the siblings or multiple of the siblings will move into the property and just not go through the actual succession, the ownership succession that has to happen. Well, it's much easier to do that at a time that's not at the time of a storm or when you're trying to recover from an event than to do it beforehand. So please, we've seen it happen down 2 and 3 generations where succession is not completed. So please have that clear and done. That will help out a lot. And that brings me to, as I said a moment ago, family land. We call it applicant on owned land, or family land is something that we find that does occur, especially in some rural areas. And those can have eligibility for each structure on that land. We've seen situations where we say, mother and father live in the front house and then pass on, and then one of the siblings will move from the back house to the front, and they have children of their own, and so forth and so forth. But just make sure you have clear tax parcel information for that. Again, that can usually be done through the tax assessor's office, and each of those structures can have eligibility if the documentation supporting it is clear. POA, of course, this goes without saying, but we usually have to note this. Anyone not capable of handling their own affairs, of course, is still eligible. We just have to have something showing that that agency is in place and that that person is a registered agent of that person. As far as supplemental occupancy goes, utilities, electric, gas, water, trash, sewage, phone, cable, really anything to help establish occupancy as far as utility goes, but please make sure they're in the homeowner's name. That's really helpful when moving through the process. We will also take a photocopy or a PDF of the current driver's license of the applicant, and we've also used voter registration as well. As far as the floodplain goes, the information about where the house lies in the floodplain is also helpful. Those are usually driven by the advisory-based flood elevation maps, which was brought up earlier. And we usually use the evidence that to ensure that flood insurance is in place, and that will have a determinant on your level of benefits as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so getting into DOB, the biggest potential sources of DOB that we normally deal with is FEMA. And it starts with the FEMA IA, which is individual assistance. If you can have a copy of your damage assessment from FEMA, it should show what kind of damage you had, whether it's effective, minor, major, destroyed, etc. That's typically our primary thing that we look for, other than insurance payouts, I should say. As far as other agencies go, assisting agencies, FEMA is kind of the first thing that we look for. And like I said, those payouts are for the damage assessment, what we'll start with, as well as any NFIP coverage, and that's normally driven by the NEMIS data. We'll do a bump up against that. That's the National Emergency Management Information System. So a lot of that data for the individual applicants will be captured in there, and we can do that bump up before moving forward with our process. It is a delivery sequence, and if anybody is curious to look at it, it's 44 CFR 206.191. I know that's a lot of federal regulation garb there, but it really does outlay the actual delivery sequence. Obviously, FEMA in general is short-term recovery versus us. We are CDBG funded, so that's long-term recovery. So that delivery sequence is outlaid pretty well in 44 CFR. And SBA is typically going to be after us for most programs, and that's mentioned there as well. But that is something that we have to look out for as far as duplications of benefits. As far as the parish and municipality contact info, please keep that info at hand. It's going to be different, obviously, where you live, what municipality you're in, what parish you're in. The larger parishes will have grant managers that you can contact. And even some areas will have local offices of emergency preparedness. So please have that contact info for your individual area at the time of the event. It's helpful to have that at hand rather than wait till after the event occurs, of course. Any additional info, the Office of Community Development is online at that address there. Local government assistance is kind of our non-disaster recovery side, but there's also a lot of great information of how they process and do things for their grants that are not impacted by disasters. We have a lot of great informational resources. If anything I had covered here needs more supplement, you got Federal Register notices, action plans, any CDBG program guidance, et cetera. And then, of course, HUD Exchange. HUD is our funding agency. So any determinations on different programs or how to interpret regulations, I usually start with HUD Exchange and go from there. And I would encourage you to do the same. So thanks.
Thank you. So my name is Ciara Goldwater, and I'm with Fannie Mae's Disaster Recovery and Rebuilding team. And so first off, for folks who are not familiar with who Fannie Mae is, we are the largest purchaser of single-family mortgages in the country. We basically own about 1 in every 4 mortgages on the single-family side. And then on the multifamily side, we own about 25% of the rental units in multifamily projects. And so one of the things that, the reason I'm here is that hurricanes and other disaster events have become more and more frequent. And so my team was set up after the 2017 hurricanes of Harvey, Irma, Maria, and really to have sort of a boots on the ground approach, interact with folks like you, some of the presenters here today, but to really engage and understand what is happening locally to these disaster impacted communities, and to build relationships and partnerships, and really sort of take that information back to Fannie Mae so that we can look at our own policies and requirements and understand if they're working or not working. So for example, most homeowners are very surprised when they see their lender on their insurance claim check. And the reason that, their lender's on the insurance claim check is that, that they have a mortgage, and therefore, if that mortgage is owned by Fannie Mae, the lender needs to follow our requirements for dispersing those funds, et cetera. And so it's sort of this very cyclical relationship. Next slide, please. So one of our largest programs that we have set up since the creation of our team is our disaster response network. And this is really an amazing offering. We provide 18 months of counseling to both homeowners and renters at no cost to them. And so with COVID last year, we actually expanded the disaster response network to COVID impacted borrowers. And over the last year and a half, basically the disaster response network has responded to over 70,000 calls. So they're very, they're up to whatever is thrown at them. it's basically staffed by a nonprofit called ClearPoint Credit Counseling Solutions, and they are HUD trained counselors. And so if you call one of our if we call the disaster response network, they have case managers who are specially trained just in disaster response. So they are familiar with FEMA benefits, how to deal with SBA claims, and all the myriad of paperwork that needs to be completed in order to for a homeowner or renter to apply for those. Their case managers will jump on tri-party calls, so they'll hop on a call with a lender if there's questions about forbearance or why are the insurance proceeds not being distributed, et cetera. They'll also look for additional local programs, and this is not a one-time only sort of counseling session. This is, as I said, 18 months, so it could be monthly check-ins, weekly check-ins, depending on the need of the homeowner or renter. Next slide. And so one of the key things folks probably want to know is how does somebody know if they have a Fannie Mae loan or live in a Fannie Mae property? So we have a loan lookup tool as well as a renter lookup as well. And if folks need assistance, the number that they can call is 877-833-1746, and that will get you to our disaster response network and folks who can help them with that. And then lastly, next slide. I also wanted to share with you all our Know Your Options website. And so all the information about Disaster Response Network can be found here, but also a lot of additional information that would be great for homeowners and renters. It's in plain speak. It's not in complex, mortgage terminology, insurance terminology. But our Know Your Options website, explains what, how the insurance claims process is supposed to work, what a forbearance is, what are some of the options if you're coming out of forbearance, such as payment deferral or a loan mod. As I said, you will also find the loan lookup tool here and our renter resource finder. And it's just, a great resource for anyone who's trying to understand how a mortgage works. And I'll hand it off to the next speaker.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning. I'm Janaea Lathers with the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. I'm really here today to talk a little bit about outreach and some of the resources that are helpful within our site. www.getagameplan.org is really a great hub in terms of using information for people to have a plan for disasters. There are really great catchphrases like the first 72 is on you, helpful resources for businesses and communities to learn and to understand how to prepare for hurricanes, how to prepare for disasters overall, wind events, rain events, which we've seen a significant amount of more recently, extreme rain events that cause flooding. So there's really great information within the app and with the website to learn about disaster resources, having emergency plan, looking at real-time information that parishes put out in terms of evacuations, governor's declarations, et cetera, when there is an emergency or a declared emergency. So sharing www.getagameplan.org is a great resource for everyone to be able to use and to be able to have some great information on resources that are available within your area. And we continue to update it after every disaster event to support people getting help, looking at their insurance claims, looking at disaster assistance from FEMA, if we do get that, when HUD resources come unavailable, those things. So getagameplan.org. The next thing that I really wanted to talk to everyone about is just that partnership in terms of messaging to local communities. 1 in 3 people do not have any money saved for an emergency. And typically when we're looking at disaster assistance, a lot of the populations that are helped within FEMA disaster assistance are those that are underinsured or those that do not have any insurance. So we're really, as an agency, working towards the preparedness side and changing the messaging around flood insurance specifically, looking at ways that it could be more affordable, advocating to people to talk to their insurance companies, talk about their insurance coverage and see what they can actually afford. And also the fact that, you know, hurricanes are a big threat within the state, but we've also had a lot of recent flooding events that are due to a lot of local rainwater within a short amount of time. So looking at the drainage in your area and your local jurisdiction, whether or not you're in a significant flood zone of risk or not, really looking at all of your surrounding areas of where you live in and how your local jurisdiction manages and retains water, and how much water accumulates where you live during a pronounced amount of time when there is rain or any type of emergency going on. Those are important things to know as well. So it would be really helpful, and we really look to partner with different agencies, especially who deal with the public and especially dealing with homeowners and businesses who are looking to acquire new properties, really changing the messaging around flood insurance and changing the messaging around having enough saved for what an emergency really is, not just a standard overview of what emergencies may look like, realistic views of how emergencies are being categorized and how they're affecting people over time. We just saw that, you know, a couple of weeks ago with a flooding event in the Baton Rouge area and in the Lake Charles area. So getagameplan.org and just looking at how many people we're seeing that don't have money saved for emergency and that are either underinsured or have no insurance, really changing the messaging in terms of what's affordable and how we can better message that to support communities truly in recovery. And with that, I'll turn it over to our next speaker.
Hi guys, it's Danielle again with board member with PIA of Louisiana. That's the Professional Insurance Agents of Louisiana. And I am going to talk again about the importance of what to discuss with your insurance agent before, during, and after, and going forward, what we can do for you. Since we already kind of talked about the policy jacket, my biggest tip is find your policy. You can direct your clients and other homeowners that you might know. Everything is emailed now. If it's online, it's safe. Get yourself a flash drive or a thumb drive or a backup. Download everything to that. Keep it with you wherever you go. It's a lot easier than carrying around a box of paperwork. We can skip to the next slide. I'm sorry. Thank you. And then one more slide. We won't go over what the policy contains because we already talked about all of that. But what you do need to know, again, before the storm occurs, what to do. You want to repair, remove, and secure anything in your yard and maybe help your neighbors do the same. Anything that could be damaged already, that could become a windborne debris in a weather wind event. You want to make sure everything's secure in your yard so it doesn't damage your house any further, or your neighbor's house, or your neighbor's house on down the way. You want to, I'm sorry, I'm skipping through my notes faster than I thought I would be. Okay, so during the storm, what to talk to your agent about during the storm. We can skip a slide, please. I'd like to say we're not going to talk during the storm because we're in the middle of it. So stay inside. Be safe, make sure you have a plan, where to go, what to do, that you have everything taken care of ahead of time. One big tip as always is to protect yourself, just like on an airplane, and then help others. Make sure your family is safe, and then you can reach out to those around you. After the storm, definitely contact your agent if you have damage. You want to make sure that you've taken photos of everything. You want to make sure that you've protected anything from any further damage, mitigating, putting on blue tarps, securing anything that might have tree damage or could cause accidents. Call the right people if there's electrical lines down and so forth. Make sure that you've taken photos of everything. A big tip here is do not throw anything away. In the case of any kind of claim, whether it's a flood claim or a hurricane claim or a wind claim or a tornado claim, do not throw anything away. If it's nasty, disgusting, just make a pile, set it to the side. Your adjuster is going to want to see everything. Anything that you do need to replace or that you have to spend money on, save all of your receipts. Again, I think I'm reiterating that. And then another really good tip I would say is during your conversations with your adjuster, your insurance company, document who you're talking to, time and day of the conversation, and a little bit about what was said. That way there's somewhat of a timeline. And if something were to go wrong and you don't get your proper response back in the time amount that you think you should, your agent will have something to say and be able to say, we talked with Mr. Smith at the adjusting office and said he would get back with us in a couple of days. And that would just kind of help your agent to go to bat and make sure you're getting the proper contact that you should. The next slide, please. This came directly from a couple of my companies. There's been so much activity over the last year. There are people that are still suffering with existing damage. And then of course we're approaching a new season, which makes people a little bit nervous. What do we do? If your claim has not been filed, if it's not been closed, the information directly from the companies, what they're hoping that you do is make every effort to have your home repaired, which we understand. Everybody understands that there's a lot of homes that have been needed to be repaired over the last year or so. And, with the recent floodings and then the winter storms too, try to document any attempts that you've made to contact contractors, to line up contractors, the contractors you've spoken to who were unable to accept the jobs. This is a good timeline to kind of set a precedence and maybe help out the companies as well going forward on how they need to hire adjusting firms, because a lot of times that's third party. Again, if the homes cannot be completed, you want to try to protect your home at all costs from any further damage, whether that's tarping the roof or just nailing down broken windows, putting boards over broken windows, things like that. That's just an example of one way to take care of things. And then the last tip, which I think is very brilliant from our companies, is not to make a hurried decision when hiring a contractor. We're desperate times you would think call for desperate measures. Don't just accept the pressure. We need to get you in line to get these things done. We want to make sure they're licensed and insured. If you need to get a point of reference, look up the contractor on Google, but definitely make sure they have credentials. And there are scammers out there, so just be careful. Be careful of who you're hiring. Lastly, the professional insurance agents of Louisiana have been a great resource for me in my career. They should be a great resource for you as well. Our website has a lot of information of things that we're doing in the community, things that we have access to, where to go for links to the Department of Insurance if needed. Also, we are a great resource to find a very professional insurance agent. So if you have someone that's looking for that and you don't know anyone right offhand, you can call the PIA and they will direct you to someone who is involved. Typically what we see, and it's tried and true, is that agents who invest their time in this association and other associations like ours, they tend to be very educated and informed, and they're going to involve themselves in the issues that are affecting our citizens today. So that's about all that I have. And thank y'all so much.
Hi, this is Sandy, and Rebecca asked me to take over the questions. Danielle, while you're still on here, there was something that you mentioned in the first part that you didn't know a lot of detail about, and I don't remember what that was. was like the second slide or third slide. And Warren Bird is here now, so he might be able to answer that if you can remember what that was.
Oh, he did. He came on and he talked about the app.
Okay, perfect. And then the question came up, Gil, could you explain what, or I'm sorry, Ed, duplication of benefit might be?
Right. So DOB is obviously stands for duplication of benefits. You can only benefits for federal programs can only come for and get paid. Beneficiaries can only get paid once. So if a certain risk is covered by insurance that was in place, that would have to be counted in the determination of benefits. As I said, FEMA is usually first in that delivery sequence. I can't recall it off the top of my head, but it's in 44 CFR of that sequence. I believe we're right after FEMA, anything funded by HUD, which is our funding agency, and then other agencies will come after that. But in general, we have a DOB policy for on the OCD website. So yes, any benefits received from insurance would have to be counted before benefits would be determined. That's what duplication of benefits means.
Thank you. And Gil, could you go over one more time the statutory limits versus the value of the home?
Of course. So under the National Flood Insurance Program, flood insurance, we have statutory limits. That means the maximum amount of coverage you can buy for your home is $250,000 for the building and $100,000 for the content. So what I was referring to as for the value of the home is there is the possibility of being over-insured under the NFIP. If your house is a complete loss, but it's only valued at $150,000, that's all you will receive under the NFIP is $150,000. Even though you are paying for coverage of $250,000. So it's imperative that your insurance agent work with you. If you have mandatory purchase, it's going to be the valuation of the home or the amount of the loan. So I encourage as much coverage as they can afford, but the numbers I mentioned earlier, they're drastic and different. So any coverage that the homeowners can afford to be able to purchase a separate flood insurance policy. Remember, it's a single peril policy. It's just important for them to be covered, especially with the amount of rainfall we have had recently, and then with the fast approaching hurricane season. Get the amount of insurance they can afford, and so it can be anywhere between $250,000 down.
And I want to also add one question in there that comes up a lot is when the appraisal is done on the home and the damage and or you come out with the value of the home, that's just the structure, not the land, right?
That's absolutely correct. Under the NFIP, when we send our adjusters out there, the adjusters will get a valuation based on community criteria. So the community is going to give them cost per square foot, or they're going to give them, go off with tax appraisal, tax assessor rules, and then that the adjuster will have that to compare. But it is going to be off of the structure. We do not include the property in the valuation for the flood insurance.
Okay. We have had closed captioners today that are Judy Applewhite and Karen Campbell, so I'd like to thank them. And I think Karen is trying to get into the room now, Paige. But I kind of like to ask Angela to talk a little bit about the disaster resource page that you have on Louisiana Realtors, the benefits and the contributions and who's eligible for that funding, because you have some really cool assistance out there.
We provide a disaster resource web page that is updated very frequently on our website. To learn more about that, you can visit www.louisianarealtors.org under the Realtors tab, Disaster Resources. There's a plethora of information and it is updated very frequently. We've also added that link into the chat a couple of times throughout this presentation.
Right. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to type away. We'll wait a few minutes to see. I really appreciate everybody being here. And the next Louisiana Realtor webinar is July 1st. And it is, just get this up here. July 7th, don't be caught off guard, know the difference between flood insurance and disaster assistance. So Gil mentioned some of that in his slides, and there's a lot more to it. So no more questions. Oh, when filing claims, will the property be identified as a severe repetitive loss? Gil?
Okay, so we have what's called a repetitive loss, and then we have a severe repetitive loss. Under the NFIP, you basically get one freebie. So if you're damaged and you flood once, it's really not going to have impact on any of your premiums. Now, however, if you have 2 or more claims within 10 years, each one of those claims is over $1,000, you will be added on to what's called a repetitive loss list. Now, a severe repetitive loss is a little bit more. I mean, you have to have 4 claims of over $5,000 within the same time period, or 2 claims which equal the total valuation of the home. Then you're put on what's called a severe repetitive loss list. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to break that the flood, rinse, repeat cycle. So if you're put on the RL or SRL list, you can anticipate a higher flood insurance premium. There will be a percentage fee that's added on that is meant to provide motivation to get these houses mitigated. One of the good things about the SRL under certain grants, as I mentioned earlier about that cost match, if you are a SRL and you apply for and are approved for certain grants, there could be 100% coverage for that mitigation project. So it's not a good thing that you flooded multiple times and has led you to the SRL list, but there are avenues to help you come out by mitigation. And most often that's by elevation. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but elevating the slab on grade type structure can be quite expensive. So this grant is a way to help with that process.
Natalie, question, what is the general insurance response to contractor fraud? Anybody have a Danielle or Warren?
Oh, I'm thinking of how to respond to contractor fraud. It would make me very, very angry. I'm sure there's some great litigation out there, but I would probably contact the little department over here in Mandeville, Covington. That handles right?
You think of the Louisiana State Board of Contractors, Danielle, maybe?
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Certainly put something on the internet, on Google, and let the Department of Insurance know, so the companies can maybe have some intel to who is out there trying to scam us.
I would add what Danielle said, just check them out with the State Licensing Board for Contractors. They usually put out those ads right after disaster because they know how important that is. Ask your contractor if he's insured, and get his copy of his insurance company in case he's doing work and fails to follow through or causes further damage to your property. And I think was an earlier slide. Yes, you're required to mitigate as much as you can and as soon as you can your property damage, but it doesn't mean they expect you to just sign up with any contractor that walks on your property and says, "Here, let me fix your roof and your siding on your house." You can certainly exercise diligence, but within that confines, we hate fraudsters just like anybody, and they're there, unfortunately.
Good question.
I think that's about it. And again, thanks to our closed captioners. And it's July 7th. Don't be caught off guard. Know the difference between flood insurance and disaster assistance. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask, and we'll all try and get answers for you. Thank you so much. Warren?
I was going to add, as Warren, do remember it takes 30 days for flood insurance to take effect. So if you buy today, you're not covered for 30 days. So, I know as you're dealing with your clients, that's a very important purchase when they're buying a house, is to get the flood insurance as well. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Angela, do you have anything else?
No, I do not. Thank you so much, everyone. We look forward to seeing you next month.